Many people have no idea, but the scriptures speak a lot about the origin and history of the Iranian people. And it's not just any mention, it's something that dates back to the most ancient times, with records ranging from the book of Genesis to impactful passages of the Old Testament. Imagine the following. The territory we now call Iran was once known by other powerful names. In ancient times, it was called Persia, and even before that, Elam. These names appear prominently in biblical stories. These peoples played central roles in some of the most important moments for the Israelites. When you understand these relationships, many of the events of the Old Testament begin to make much more sense. You see, the Elamites, for example, were descendants of Shem, one of the sons of Noah, and they founded one of the first kingdoms after the flood. And if you've ever heard of Isaiah's prophecy about the restoration of the remnant of Israel, there is Elam mentioned as one of the places from where God would bring his people back. Now let's understand a bit more about how these peoples evolved and the impact they had. During biblical times, the Iran we know today was the cradle of great empires that shaped the destiny of various nations, including that of Israel. Think of Cyrus the Great. He is not just a dusty name in history books. Cyrus was the one who, after conquering Babylon, allowed the exiled Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem. This is documented in the book of Ezra. He was seen by the Jews as a true liberator, to the point that the prophet Isaiah called him the anointed of God. Throughout this video, we are going to understand these stories in more detail. We will talk about the role of the Iranians in the Bible, how their interactions with the Israelites helped shape the course of history, and whether there is something deeper, something prophetic that is yet to come. So, stay until the end of this video to understand better. Let's begin this story from the Bronze Age and go through to the Persian dominion, passing by the Babylonian exile. In the book of Genesis, chapter 10, verse 22, Elam is mentioned as one of the descendants of Shem, the son of Noah, and it was one of the first kingdoms to emerge after the flood. This kingdom was located east of the Tigris River in an area that today corresponds to southwestern Iran. Elam appears a few times in the Bible. The prophet Isaiah, for instance, speaks of this kingdom as one of the places from where God would bring his people back. Elam had a very important location in antiquity, being a center of culture and power, and its influences reached as far as Mesopotamia, one of the most developed regions of that time. Elam, throughout history, was both an ally and an enemy of the great powers of the time, such as the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Even though there are not many records of direct interactions between Elam and the tribes of Israel, we know that this kingdom existed during the same period as the patriarchs and judges of Israel. The Elamites appear more frequently as enemies in battles and as part of empires that influenced Israel's history. Moving forward, the strengthening of the Iranian peoples in the northwest began with the rise of the Median Empire. According to some scholars, and based on the accounts of the historian Herodotus, it was between the end of the 8th century before Christ and the middle of the 7th century before Christ that the Iranian tribes united for the first time as a nation under the rule of Darius, a legendary figure credited with founding the Median dynasty and the Median Empire. When Darius came to power, he began working to unite the different tribes of the Medes. He made several changes in the way things were organized, creating new laws and centralizing the government. This helped the tribes, which were previously more independent, to come together and begin acting as a single nation. This unification was very important as it created a common identity among the tribes and paved the way for the Median kingdom to strengthen and expand its territory under leaders like Cyaxares and Astyages. Before continuing, we need to talk about the greatest empire of the time, the Assyrian Empire. It is mentioned many times in the Old Testament, being seen as an instrument of God's judgment over Israel and other nations. The Assyrian Empire was very powerful, with a strong army and a well-organized administration, controlling territories that extended from Mesopotamia to Egypt at its peak. Their relationship with Israel was mainly one of conflict, and the Assyrians led several campaigns that resulted in the mass deportation of Israelites in an attempt to destroy the identity of the people of Israel. It was during Assyrian rule that the kingdom of Israel fell, leading to the exile of the 10 tribes of the north. The Assyrians also invaded regions of present-day Iran, reaching territories controlled by the Medes. However, by the end of the 7th century before Christ, the Assyrian Empire began to weaken due to various internal problems, such as power disputes, poor administration, and the pressure from peoples under their dominion. With the empire in decline, the Medes seized the opportunity to grow. Cyaxares, the king of the Medes, used the Assyrians' weakness to increase the territory and influence of his people. He allied with the Babylonians, led by Nabopolassar, to finally end Assyrian control in the region. Together, they formed an alliance that also included other Iranian groups, such as the Scythians and the Cimmerians, who had the same interest: to bring down the Assyrians. The Scythians and Cimmerians were excellent horsemen and specialists in guerrilla tactics, which further strengthened the military alliance. The campaign against the Assyrians was marked by several decisive battles and long sieges. But in 612 before Christ, the alliance between the Medes and Babylonians achieved a great victory: the siege and destruction of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. This event had even been foretold by the prophet Isaiah as God's judgment. With the fall of Nineveh, the Assyrian Empire began to collapse, making way for new powers to emerge in the region. The Medes took control of much of present-day Iran and surrounding areas, while Nabopolassar and his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, founded the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which became a powerful force in Mesopotamia. The growth of these two empires brought a great shift in power in the region, which directly impacted the lives of the Jewish people. To better understand the history of the Iranians in the Bible, it is important to talk about the Neo-Babylonian Empire, as Isaiah also prophesied that the Medes would be used by God to destroy Babylon. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was primarily marked by the dominant figure of King Nebuchadnezzar II. This empire became widely known for its destruction of the city of Jerusalem in 586 before Christ, as documented in various historical and prophetic texts of the Old Testament. This event culminated in the destruction of Solomon's temple and the exile of the Jewish people, and it was a period of profound theological and cultural implications for Judah, described in detail in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar did not merely want to punish Judah. He also had a plan to bring the Jews into the Babylonian Empire, attempting to make them adapt to Babylonian culture and thus prevent future resistance. The capture of Judah, therefore, was not just a military conquest, but also an attempt to reorganize the empire politically and culturally. While this was happening, the Iranian peoples were undergoing major changes and beginning to gain more strength. While the Babylonians were busy ruling their empire and fighting against Judah and other kingdoms, the Medes, who lived to the north, were consolidating and forming a kingdom that would later join with the Persians to create a new power in the region. Then, under the leadership of Cyaxares and later Astyages, the Medes managed to organize a strong state that began to heavily influence the politics of the region. This period was crucial in laying the foundations of what would become the famous Achaemenid Empire, led by Cyrus the Great, who would later dominate both the Medes and Babylon. The Achaemenid Empire began with Cyrus the Great after the Persians revolted against the Medes and defeated Astyages, the last Median king. Cyrus was part of the Achaemenid dynasty and distinguished himself for his skills as a diplomat and military strategist, which helped him rapidly expand his territory. One of Cyrus's greatest achievements was the conquest of Babylon in 539 before Christ, when his army entered the city without much resistance after a short siege. This conquest was important not only militarily but also politically, as Cyrus presented himself as a liberator and not merely a conqueror. He allowed exiled peoples, such as the Jews, to return to their lands and rebuild their temples, which gained him the loyalty of these populations and helped maintain stability in his vast empire. Thus, Cyrus became famous for being a ruler who had a policy of tolerance and restoration of the peoples under his dominion. This was very different from what other empires were doing at the time. The rise of the Persian Empire with Cyrus was a very important moment in history, especially for the people of Judah. The prophet Isaiah even called him the Anointed of God, a key figure in fulfilling divine promises. In 538 before Christ, Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews who were in exile to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. This is recorded in the book of Ezra. What is most interesting is that the idea of the Anointed of God was usually associated only with Israelite leaders. But with Cyrus, a foreign king, God showed that his plan of salvation was not limited to one people. He can use any nation or person to accomplish his purposes. Cyrus's permission for the Jews to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem under the rule of the Persian Empire was much more than a simple political act. It helped the Jewish people to regain their religious and cultural identity, and also reaffirmed God's covenant with his people, showing that he always fulfills his promises. While Judah was going through this moment of restoration, the Persian Empire continued to grow and strengthen. At its peak, the Achaemenid Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, ruling over more than 40% of the world's population. After the death of Cyrus and a short reign by his son Cambyses II, Darius I took the throne in 522 BC. He had to deal with several internal revolts that threatened the empire but managed to restore stability. Darius stood out for being a very efficient administrator. He divided the empire into provinces, each led by a governor called a satrap, which made it easier to control the territories. Darius also created a more organized tax system and invested in infrastructure, such as the construction of the famous Royal Road, which improved communication and trade throughout the empire. In addition, he expanded the empire, conquering regions in India, Thrace, and the Indus River Valley. During the reign of Darius I, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah made their prophecies, and it was also during this time that the Second Temple of Jerusalem was rebuilt under the leadership of Zerubbabel. After Darius, his son Xerxes I took the throne. In the Bible, Xerxes is known as King Ahasuerus, from the story in the book of Esther. This book gives us a deeper look into the Persian court and narrates a moment when the Jews were under the threat of extermination by Haman, a high-ranking official of the king. In this scenario, a young Jewish exile named Hadassah, better known by her Persian name Esther, surprisingly becomes the Queen of Persia. She plays a crucial role in protecting her people, using her courage and intelligence to reveal Haman's conspiracy to the king. As a result, Haman was executed, and Esther's cousin Mordecai was promoted to a prominent position in the Persian court. The story of Esther shows us how the Jews integrated into Persian society, and also how God places the right people in the right places to fulfill his plans. Later, when Artaxerxes I, son of Xerxes, ascended to the throne, important events for the Jewish people continued to unfold. This period was very important because of the actions of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra was a priest and scribe who led the second group of Jews who returned from exile to Jerusalem with the permission of King Artaxerxes I. He was responsible for restoring the Mosaic law and reforming the Jewish community, which was drifting away from its religious traditions. The book of Ezra tells how he helped rebuild the religious and cultural life of the people, reaffirming the Torah as the center of the identity and practices of the Jews. As for Nehemiah, who was a trusted cupbearer of King Artaxerxes, he eventually became governor of Judah. He led the reconstruction of the walls of Jerusalem, a project that symbolized the recovery of the city's dignity and security. The support of King Artaxerxes for the projects of Ezra and Nehemiah shows how the Persian Empire governed at the time, allowing the regions to have a certain autonomy but still maintaining control over the empire. The Persian Empire came to an end when Alexander the Great conquered its lands in 331 before Christ and created a great empire. However, after Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals. From this division arose three main kingdoms: the Ptolemaic in Egypt, the Seleucid in Asia Minor, and the Antigonid in Macedonia and Greece. The area that is now Iran came under the control of the Seleucid Empire, which governed a large part of the Near East. The Seleucids tried to impose Greek culture in the region, founding cities in the Greek style and promoting Greek religious and cultural practices, which is known as Hellenization. However, many native populations resisted this imposition as they wanted to maintain their own cultural and religious traditions. This attempt at Hellenization ended up generating many conflicts, both within the territory and with other kingdoms, such as the Ptolemaic and the Antigonid. Furthermore, there were local revolts, such as that of the Maccabees in Judea, who fought against Greek influence. Already in the 3rd century before Christ, the Parthian people of Iranian origin took advantage of the dissatisfaction with Seleucid rule to create their own empire. Thus, the Parthian Empire began to grow and become an important force in the region of Iran. The Parthians were known for their strong cavalry and great skill with bows, which helped them to resist both the Romans and the Seleucids. They maintained many Iranian traditions and adopted Zoroastrianism as the official religion, which helped to reinforce Iranian cultural identity after the period of Greek influence. Zoroastrianism was the most influential and enduring religion of ancient Iran. This belief taught that humans had the responsibility to choose between good and evil, and these choices determined their final destiny. The religion also included purification rituals, sacrifices, and placed great importance on moral order and social justice, which ended up influencing the laws and practices of the empires that adopted this faith. After the Parthians, the Sassanids founded their empire in 224 after Christ, when they overthrew the last Parthian king. The Sassanid Empire revived and strengthened Persian culture and traditions, reintroducing many elements from the ancient Achaemenid Empire. They were great rivals of the Roman Empire and later of the Byzantine Empire. The Sassanids became known for their good administration, the construction of roads and cities, and also for strengthening Zoroastrianism, which was used as a unifying force throughout the empire. At the beginning of the 7th century after Christ, Iran was invaded by the Arabs, taking advantage of the Sassanid Empire's weakness, and Islam began to spread throughout the region. The conversion to Islam did not happen all at once, but gradually over several generations. Zoroastrianism, which was once the main religion, began to lose ground, and many Iranians converted to Islam, motivated by social, economic, and new power structure reasons. Over time, Islam became the dominant religion in Iran, profoundly transforming the country's cultural and religious identity. So, as we have seen, throughout history, Iran and Israel have had important interactions. But could there still be more to happen between these two nations, according to the Bible? In some branches of Christianity, especially among those who believe in a futurist view of biblical prophecies, Iran, as the successor to ancient Persia, is often mentioned in prophecies involving Israel. These ideas come from biblical passages that some believe refer to future events. One of the most cited texts is Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, which speaks of a great battle involving Gog and Magog, where a coalition of nations attacks Israel. Persia is mentioned as one of the nations allied with Gog. However, there are many discussions among scholars and theologians about who exactly Magog is and the symbolic meaning of this prophecy. Some scholars who believe in a futurist interpretation of the prophecies see the mention of Persia as a sign that modern Iran may play an important role in future conflicts against Israel. This idea is influenced by the current political tensions between Israel and Iran, which are widely reported, with Iran being seen as one of Israel's main enemies in the Middle East. Moreover, parts of the book of Daniel are also mentioned in this context, especially the chapters that speak about 4 great empires and the arrival of the kingdom of God. In chapter 8 of Daniel, for example, there is a vision of a ram with 2 horns, representing the kings of Media and Persia, and a goat, which represents the king of Greece. Some believe that these images may be connected to modern or future events, seeing in them symbols of forces that still operate today. This futurist interpretation of prophecies can be interesting, but it can also be risky. On one hand, it reinforces the idea that the Bible remains relevant to today's events, but on the other hand, it can lead to exaggerated connections between ancient texts and the current world, resulting in speculative interpretations or those influenced by today's political events. Although these discussions about Iran, Israel, and future prophecies reflect the desire of many Christians to understand God's plan for the future, it does not give anyone the right to attempt to predict specific dates and events, as some do. Jesus had already warned that there would be wars and rumors of wars, and since then, the world has never known complete and lasting peace. However, this search for signs and speculations can end up diverting people from the true biblical message. In this video, for example, we talked about the biblical origin of the Iranian peoples and their complex interactions with other nations, such as the Israelites, from the time of Elam in the Bronze Age to the mighty Persian Empire. Instead of focusing on trying to decipher prophecies and directly connect them to current events, we should pay more attention to how divine providence has manifested throughout all of this history. These prophecies and stories in the Bible show us that God is the true author of all history. He uses both the good and the bad moments to fulfill his plans. In other words, the main message that appears in all these accounts is that God is sovereign over all nations and events. The Bible makes it clear that God has the power to raise and bring down kingdoms according to his will, using them to discipline, purify, or restore his people. God is not a distant spectator. He is actively involved in human history, guiding events to accomplish his plan of salvation. This understanding should lead us to trust more in God and live with the assurance that even when everything seems chaotic, we are under the care of a wise and sovereign God. Understanding that God is in control brings us spiritual peace and helps us focus on living according to his commandments instead of worrying about the future. Now write in the comments if you were already familiar with the origin and history of the Iranian peoples in the Bible. Share this teaching with more people, like the video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video.